Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Noe Tanigawa.
Aloha mai kako, gangies. As soon as I heard this topic, I knew we were going to have a great time. So that's what tonight's all about, okay? I hope you'll feel completely comfortable, as a few of us are up here to just talk anytime, pitch in. We're going to love it. Now, there are a couple of people here that you don't know yet, so let me introduce them to you. We'll start with our import today. Her name is Sarah Roberts, came to us from California. She's familiar with Hawaii, however. She did her graduate work here, sociolinguist, and she studied hybrid languages, hybrid Russian, Arabic hybrids, and right now she's working on a book about Hawai'i Pigeon. She's doing it for Cambridge University Press, and she's done a lot of studying about pigeon history. We're going to learn a lot from her. Thanks so much for coming, Sarah. Really glad to have you. Now, Governor John Waiheʻe III carried the aspirations of the 1978 Constitutional Convention into the governor's office when he became the first state governor of Hawaiian ancestry. Remember that one? Yeah. Served 2 terms. Instrumental creating the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. He's still game, providing leadership and counsel on Kanaka Maoli issues. My favorite governor, John Waiheʻe. John, thank you so much. Did you know that we've got at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, the Charlene Sato Center for Pidgin, Creole, and Dialect Studies? Co-director right here, Katie Drager, also a sociolinguist. She studies what we're saying about ourselves when we speak Pidgin, among other things. Thanks so much for being here, Katie. Thank you for having me. And this other one here, stand-up comic, TV video host, headline comedy clubs across America, always #1 comedian in our hearts. I'm not sure if you've checked out his YouTube channel, Daily Pigeon. Oh yeah, okay. If you haven't checked it out yet, we're going there after this. We're going to crash your site. Andy Bumatai. Andy, all right. We've got a couple of native Pidgin speakers here, and we're off into our night tonight. You know, Pidgin and Creole, it's an intellectual topic. It's a field of study. And there's a lot of history we'd like to start with here. Maybe you can launch us off on that, Sarah, because you've studied Pidgin since it existed in Hawaii. When was that?
Well, the earliest text I can find that is recognizably Pidgin is from 1791.
1791,
Yes.
Wow, okay.
And I've done my research by looking at any old documentation of Pidgin, looking at court records, newspapers, high school yearbooks, anything that has information about the history of the language. And so that's...
What was Pidgin like in 1791?
Oh, well, back then, so when we talk about Pidgin, we have to also recognize that there were 2 different varieties of Pidgin. There was one based on the native Hawaiian language and another one based on English. And they coexisted for much of the 19th century. And in fact, when the sugar plantations first really took off after 1876, when they brought in a lot of the Chinese and Portuguese and Japanese labor, what they learned on the plantations was actually this Hawaiian Pidgin form of the Hawaiian language. And then after the overthrow of the monarchy, that very much shifted to English as being the dominant language that was used by immigrants in Hawaii.
So it went from being Hawaiian Pidgin to Pidgin English.
Yes,
Pidgin Hawaiian
although
to
they
Pidgin
both
English.
coexisted during that period. But it was more in like the towns in like Honolulu where English Pidgin was more spoken. But once Pidgin Hawaiian kind of died out, then a newer form of this English Pidgin was used throughout the plantations.
Yeah. We've been talking about how Pidgin's so different across the islands. I mean, Governor, you grew up on the Big Island, Honoka'a, plantation town. I mean, what kind of Pidgin was spoken?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I'm feeling the same anxiety sitting between 2 PhDs that I used to feel back in Honoka'a school, sitting between 2 teachers who I knew were going to correct my English. You see, but it's so ironic that we have come so far that I'm worried that they're going to correct my pidgin.
Well, you can turn around and correct theirs.
So I'm going to try my best to remember. What was it like? It was everyday language. I mean, there was no distinction. And I think they also were like different gradations of words. So I don't know whether or not, at least for me, when I look back on it, whether or not it was just about vocabulary. And I guess we were talking about this earlier. So it's also, I think Pidgin was a language that people used that also expressed a kind of culture. It was a way of, they spoke, but the way they structured sentences would actually indicate value of some kind. And if you heard it, and that coupled with enunciation, see, I learned something. Enunciation was important because if you enunciated, the sound of the pronunciation of a word would indicate whether somebody knew Pidgin or not. Oh. And one of the worst things, which some Punahou educated politicians do, is they would go before a local crowd and try to speak Pidgin. You know Andy, right? Oh. And it's just like, because they would pronounce the words, perfectly. And somebody else, like would say, "Hey, governor, say something in Pidgin." Look, what for? And the guy would say, "Well, I think the people should know, what you say." Yeah, no need. And he doesn't even know what I'm saying. I just did it, So a lot of it, in my opinion, when we were growing up, a lot of what we call Pidgin had to do with sound and the way you express a value. See? So, you would say more better. Or some more better, which means a little bit less more better, but, But you would do it, what that was expressing is our way of, it's almost Japanese in some ways. Oh. Because it's our way of saying something modestly that's enormous. Yeah. And I think a lot of that. And the master of doing that was frankly Danny Noe. And if I have time tonight, I'll tell you how somebody who spoke perfect English could actually speak to a Pidgin-speaking crowd. And he was fantastic at it.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about sort of this code switching that Pidgin involves, right? Because it's a constituency that understands it. You folks have studied that, Katie, at the Hawai'i Center.
Yeah, we talk about that ability a lot, how people are able to shift between different parts of their linguistic repertoire. So people talk about it as turning on their Pidgin, turning it on and off. And even within Pidgin, kind of having it be heavier or not. And
according to what?
It depends on a lot of different things. So who someone is talking to, if they're local or not, or if they're good friends or not, or what the situation is like. So we try and do interviews with people to be able to study their Pidgin, but one of the ways to get people to turn off their Pidgin is to take them to the university to do an interview and turn on the recorder. So it ends up being really tricky to get the kind of data that we need to be able to study Pidgin. Yeah.
Where do you have to take them? But I mean, Andy, did you grow up speaking the same Pidgin, you think, to everybody?
Well, when I grew up in Waiheʻe, and right there, when I grew up, it was Waiheʻe, and now it's Waiheʻe. So not only, and we spoke about this backstage, Governor, not only did the Pidgin change, but the Hawaiian changed for the better. People started,
pronouncing it
honoring the Okinas and such. But when we spoke Pidgin back then, we didn't know we were speaking Pidgin. It's just how we spoke. It's not until we got to the to town, when the waitress would say, "I'm sorry, what do you want?" You know, you see, when I was a kid, you know, my dad was in the service, so we lived in San Francisco. I didn't get till Hawaii till like the 4th grade, right? So I used to hear my dad and all his friends speaking Pidgin, right? And I thought, wow, they're speaking some weird baby talk, you know? But I knew it and I understood it, and then I got here to Hawaii and went, the whole state talks like that. You know? And then it became, like you were saying, an identifier, you know? I mean, I do this thing in my act where I go, if you go to the mainland and you go to a Starbucks and you see a brother behind the counter and you don't know, you know, if he's local or Mexican, right? So what you do is you throw out small kind pigeon to see if he bite. Right? So you go, yes, can I help you? Yeah, are you, brah? And if they go, I'm sorry, what? You go, I'm sorry, I'll have a coffee latte.
Yeah, right. You could be in a poke shop
Right.
in LA. Same thing.
Same thing, but if the brother bite, are you from Hawaii? Yeah, man, that's a boom, game on. Right? And of course, there's always the howlies behind you going, they're talking about us. Right?
No.
But, you know, more than a communication tool, it became an identifier. It was like,
Right.
where you from? And to the point, like backstage, if you say, I shave, you from Hilo, eh?
Yeah, I shave.
Or whatever.
I shave for sure.
I shave instead of shave ice.
You know, what does it say about cultures when they mix and come up with a language? I mean, what are we saying about ourselves when we use Pidgin? Huh, Sarah?
Yeah, well, and I should first say that what we refer to as Pigeon is actually, linguistically, we refer to it as a Creole, which means it's a native language. People speak it in the home, and it's different than what it originally was, which is
Some ad hoc,
Exactly.
no structure, kind of just...
right. And in the process of becoming a native language, it has been enriched by grammatical and phonological structures from Hawaiian, from Chinese and Portuguese and Japanese. And
Like what?
well, for instance, walk feet. I don't know how many of you know the expression walk feet. That comes from Hawaiian hele vavai. So that's what we refer to as kind of a pretty transparent word for word gloss from Hawaiian.
Walk feet?
Walk feet to
never
yeah
heard
to
of
take
that
to
one.
take a walk to go. It's an older expression, maybe
Yeah.
not more in the current generation. But then you have other grammatical structures. For instance, the use of the word stay before a verb. So stay means to be somewhere. But if you use it before a verb, right, it means a continuous action.
Even if that word is go.
Right. Exactly. Stay, go. And this comes from Portuguese. This is a very, from Portuguese, estar, has very similar function to stay in Hawaii Creole.
Oh, so I was reading about that way that we add yeah or at the end of a sentence maybe. Is that uniquely Pidgin?
But what?
What? Well, I mean, when you say this is really good, yeah? Or,
You know what that is? But that's, I always say that Pidgin contains the broken shards of the Hawaiian language. Because if you say, like, what's your name in Hawaii, and you say, Owaiko Inoa, and you go up, in English, you would go, hey, what's your name? You go down,
Yeah.
right? So in Pidgin, you go, hey, bro, what's your name? You go up, right? Because it's like Hawaiian.
That's
right?
kind of what I was talking about when you indicate value too. When you talk about stuff. Okay, like Inouye, I heard him give a speech once, which is masterful. Yeah. And everybody in the audience Dan Inouye spoke better English than, I don't know any Haole who speaks better English than Dan Inouye. Or maybe I should say any Native American original speaker who speaks better English. than Inouye. But he would talk about his experience going to World War II and the formation of the 442nd. And when he would describe that story, he would talk about how they were all mustering to go out on the ship, to ship out to a training camp. And his father walked up to him and he said to him, don't make me shame, or don't bring shame on the family. And then Inouye went on and talked about his experience in the war and how much that meant to him. And then but in the middle of this speech, which was just immaculately spoken, and then he said something like, just before, in the middle, and he would say, and yet, when it was all pow, I think I made my father proud. I think I made my father proud, okay? But if you really listen, the mastery of that was, the first was obvious. When he said pow, all pow, he could have said all finished. But everybody in the audience who was from the 442nd immediately knew he was one of them again. Because only in Hawaii would you use that particular phrase. But that's like the first cut. Actually, if you look at the way he structured that story, when he talked about no make shame, don't make me shame, every kid in Hawaii grew up with the idea, no make a. No make a. You don't bring shame on your family. So the language actually no make a is a value system that was being expressed, that had been incorporated and accepted by all groups. And then when he went on, and at the end he says, I think I made my father proud. Now, if he was from Texas, which I can't believe got to be the most sexiest language, but if he was from Texas, he would say, I know I made my daddy proud. But if Inouye said, he said, I think I made my father proud, because if he said, I know, hey, don't get big head, bro.
Yeah.
So we also use the language to express the value systems. That's my current big thing. The value systems that each ethnic group contributed to our society. And I think that what Pigeon does, and if you really understand its function, it is a sense of localism. What is Hawaii when you strip it of all its various parts and you put it all back together? What is the sum of our society? The sum of our society, for years, we used to talk about the fact that here the differences make us special and the rest. But I'm suggesting when we study the language and we understand the values it was expressing, we also have a whole lot of commonality, which we all agree on. And I think the language of localism is Pidgin. And that's why I hope it perpetuates forever.
But you touched on something that's very important, and that is the difference between shame and embarrassment, which culturally I think is shared a lot by Japanese, where you say, oh, wow, I was all shame. And that's because of how you reflect on your family, as opposed to, oh, I was so embarrassed.
How you reflect on yourself.
That's on yourself. And when you say make a, you talk about a Pigeon thing. That, of course, means make ass, right? Because you're going to make an ass out of yourself. No make a, no make ass, right? Well, remember when you were a kid and somebody do something stupid and you go, hana okolele, right? If you think about it, what they're saying is hana okole, which hana is make and okole is ass. Make a. So when they go hana okolele, right? So it's interesting again
how this all evolves.
But speaking of evolution, I mean, you're pointing out to me sort of the class consciousness that Pigeon is about. It's about a certain class identification. Is that correct in Hawaii?
Yeah, I'd say so. Pigeon, I think, has what in linguistics we would call covert prestige. And this is a kind of prestige that's associated with local values. So things like here in Hawaii, that would be personal connections between people, humility. And so it gets tied with these kinds of meanings associated with it. not saying something when maybe we both know the answer and maybe it's a little bit taboo or I shouldn't maybe be talking about it. I can kind of slip in maybe some vague language that an outsider might not understand, right?
The kind.
The kind.
Or making big body. How's
Oh.
that? I mean, because you keep referring to this sort of little bit of humility that's also involved in this Pigeon, making things not blasting, but making just a little understatement, possibly. What are some other characteristics of Pigeon in Hawaii?
Okay, Professor.
Sarah?
You're on.
Yeah.
No me karang.
Go for it. Devo!
Well, I guess going on the humility kind of idea or the kind of shared knowledge kind of idea. So if there's someone, this is something that English speakers get wrong, especially if they move here, they're from outside. They might say things that more than they need to say, right? Name people who maybe they don't need to name, right? And instead can kind of hint at it, like say, oh,
The kind?
the kind, or just, oh, you know the person I'm talking about. They did this, or hint at it a bit more. And using Pigeon to do that, Pigeon, with words like the kind, are
So
able
it goes
to.
along with other protocols, kind of social protocols.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's and you see that when you get the Califriskins, I think you call them, turning on, trying to speak Pigeon, right, and getting things wrong. So part of it is the pronunciation, the ho brah, like go beach.
I mean,
Hey,
you've
bro,
tried to
me likes they go your house, cow.
I mean, you've given lessons in this, Andy.
Dude.
Yeah, I mean, because there are websites about what to do,
Well, Well, when I was doing the Daily Pigeon a lot, people would say, what's the best way to practice my Pigeon? And I'd say, at home by yourself. But a way to do it, and the governor mentioned it, is you can start using pow instead of finish. You can start saying not instead of I don't believe you. Try with the one-syllable words first. Before you get into that whole hammajang thing.
Hammajang!
Yeah, exactly. Because, it's interesting, I traveled with Dan Inouye, and what a speaker. And he did a thing, and I used to watch him, where he spoke perfect English, but he did it with a Pigeon accent.
Yeah.
And it was like, when we come down to the people of Hawaii, there is a bifurcation of the tonality of the, it's just like all these kind of hyperbolic words. But you go, is that Pigeon or he's smart?
And that's the trick.
That's the trick.
That's the trick.
What? Use long words in a Pigeon kind of way?
Well, yeah.
No, just this and that,
Well, my dad used to say, never mind use that kind of hyperbolic words. But here's a guy who used to say film as film, But it was interesting because if you ever try to sell something on Craigslist, right? And then you get a guy and he calls you up, "Oi, bro, calling about the truck, what? You still selling them, right?" You immediately go, "Yeah, bro, I think still going, what? You like?" You wouldn't go, "Yes, it's still available. Would you like to purchase it?" Oh, I'll call you back. Boom.
I'll go, what, bro, you getting money?
What? I mean,
Here's a story, and I don't mean to embarrass the governor here, but I was on a flight, from here to the Big Island. We were in first class, right?
Sure.
You didn't know it, but I was sitting in the seat behind you, and you were governor at the time, right?
Okay.
And you were sitting with somebody else, and I don't know who it was, but you guys were talking about hardcore state business. But it was all in Pigeon. And I was going, if I had a tape recorder, because you're going, bro, if that bugger think he gonna make appropriations and steal that. No way, bro. Hey, honest kind, we go for that. That's only lose money. Which, and we talked about this backstage, complicated ideas can be communicated in Pidgin.
Yeah.
Proof positive.
I guess.
Hey. Now, what do you think they were talking about, Sarah, when they voted Hawaii, the Hawaiian accent, as the number 7 sexiest? Are they talking about the way we all normally talk, or?
I'm not really sure what criteria they use.
Do we talk differently here normally?
I mean, Hawaiian English, and not just only Pidgin, but English as spoken in Hawaii as a whole, has a distinctive phonology, which the sound system.
Really?
And so one of the features is the lack of the vowel. I'm sorry, the R after a vowel. So or th.
At the end, you mean?
Feta instead of feather.
Right.
Oh.
Exactly.
Feta.
Feta. Right.
The bird get nice feta.
And I heard Boston accent was also rated highly on that.
Yeah.
And that also has a similar feature. So I don't know if that
I
is
kind of
relevant.
thought.
I used to think the Filipino guys at the Honoka school was pretty sexy. They would go out there. Psst, psst. That should be number 1. I don't think any Texan can do that. What do you
I guess it depends on how you grow up.
That's why I get so many Filipinos.
Where's Ben when you need him?
But there again are the broken shards of Hawaiian, because if you speak Pidgin, right, and you get the e, a, o, u vowel sounds, you go to learn Hawaiian, and you halfway there,
Well, I know in the Hilo, they teach in the Hawaiian language department, they have a textbook that actually uses Pidgin to teach Hawaiian, because a lot of the mistakes that people make in speaking Hawaiian is because you're thinking of it in a standard English way.
Right.
But if you think of expressing yourself in a Pidgin way, that is much closer to Hawaiian. So it's actually a help to knowledge of Pidgin is a help in learning Hawaiian.
I'll tell you, it can get you in trouble though, because I was at a Kamehameha band competition. My daughter was competing, okay? And the Kalani Falcons were also competing. And a lady in front of us, and we had some haole people with us, right? Well, if you say falcon in Pidgin, the A becomes round. So every time they did something good, she'd go, Falcon Pride! Oh, that's Falcon good! And the people with us, what is she saying? Falcon, it's pronounced Falcon.
God.
Yeah.
Well, look, everybody in this audience knows what we're talking about here, because we live in this soup of how we talk in Hawaii. Some of it is Pidgin, some of it is not. Some words we throw in, some, as our language is evolving. I mean, I was talking to a community college professor the other day who said, my students don't speak Pidgin. No. They don't. They love it, though. They think it's funny. They like to hear it, but they don't speak it. Is this a part of local identity?
Well, I think people speak much better English today than when I was growing up, in general. But one of the big changes in language also, which Andy's alluding to, is we used to, as part of Pidgin conversation, we'd slaughter Hawaiian words. Like he said, waianai. Nobody, maili instead of maili. Or, I grew up in, above Honoka, was called Ahualoa, and we would go hauloa. I mean, I thought that was the name of the place for years. But people have learned, little kids now learn how to pronounce Hawaiian words. And so it's interesting to listen to their pidgin of today, and they pronounce Hawaiian perfectly. I was just on the Waianae Coast. I was telling people, because of this show, deliberately went to hear people talking. And it was amazing to me. Well, first of all, they were using a lot of initials, which I didn't understand. You know, I understand LOL, you know, but that's it. And then the second thing, though, was their Hawaiian was excellent. Excellent. And, you know, it's just how language grows, I guess. But
And you've been talking about how profitably Senator Inouye used a few well-chosen Hawaiian words to, you know, just
and express Hawaiian values.
to express.
Or Hawaii values, which I think is actually more what I was trying to say. It's universal. It may started out with Hawaiian. It may start out from our Asian influences, but somehow in the amalgamation of going through the state, it's created a kind of a different culture that is being expressed. I don't know. I mean, that's my thing. I mean, I decided to push commonality now instead of differences.
Is there something about identity that we need to say here as we look forward? Are there words that we want to preserve? Is there something that we have to think now in order to have this identifying language all between us, say 20, 50 years from now? Are there decisions that have to be made? Are there some words that we for sure want to have?
How do you control it? Yeah. I don't think you can you? I mean, isn't it a cultural thing? It just naturally evolves.
And goes away. Like hammajang, we were just talking about behind the scenes, that it finally made it into the Oxford Dictionary, but what, in Hawaii, do people still use it?
Well, that's how you know it died.
And then I'm thinking,
Also, hammajang was an Oahu word. That was not a neighbor island word. It was, we learned that coming to Honolulu. Honolulu.
Well, look at habuteru.
Habuteru, yeah.
What's that?
You don't know what's habuteru? Darn funny, what kind of Japanese you?
I'm a kotonk.
When kids, when
See, that's what's happening to the language.
No, but when they act all sad, like, I'll let go, but I'll let go, and I act all habuteru.
Brother, you all
But
habut.
it's Japanese, right?
Habut. Habutero, habut.
It's normal for all languages to change, and a language that doesn't change is a dead language. So it's important, it's an important indicator of how the language remains, vital if we have new things replacing old things. That's a very natural part of language.
There are some words that are more popular now than they were before, like choke.
Yes. Yes, that's a good example.
Guess what choke came from?
What?
Right? It's a fishing term. Right? Because when had plenty of fish, right? And they try to get through a small part, there's so much fish, they choked the small place. So had choke fish.
Wow.
So, hey, what? Get fish? Oh, God, get choke fish. And then it came to, what? Was the place crowded? Oh, had choke people. That's that,
and
it's just, that's the I love
cool.
that part of where
love
things
that
come
too.
from.
How about shoots?
Shoots.
That's shoots.
Shooting then.
Gotta have that.
Yeah, shoots. I don't know how that started, but I respect it because there's violence involved. Shoot! No problem.
But how about beef? Is beef? I thought beef was something people said about fighting everywhere. I thought that was a synonym
but
for
you know
fighting.
what? It got old. Now it's scrap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The language has changed. It evolves with the generations.
You guys used to say beef.
Yeah. That's why I feel old.
But they don't say beef on the mainland, or they do?
What, on the mainland?
Yeah.
Why don't you hit them first and then ask?
They say, "What's your beef?" You know,
Well,
you
what's
got a
the
problem.
argument?
What's your beef?
Oh, yeah.
But they don't beef.
Hey, Lolo, go outside, beef. Don't bring them in the room.
Well, we had, but, Waiheʻe, when we used to fight, right? We used to say "up and up," which
Yeah.
I don't think they say anymore, right? Up and up with no karate, no kicking, no fence, no stick, no. And then you take off your shirt and you go off the side, and then your friends act like they're gonna beef, and then you know what I mean? But
Then you're hoping somebody calls the teacher.
yeah. And you pose, like the chickens when they fight,
Okay, is there Pigeon body language?
Oh, what, are you kidding?
Have you studied Pigeon body language, Katie?
No, I haven't
But that
studied
is a
it.
very important.
I will say that we need way more Pidgin speakers in programs studying them. So if you're interested in those kinds of things, there's a great master's thesis there. Yeah.
Well, here's a body language, right? Throwing a shaka,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You get those guys, tourists. Yeah. But I always think, well, what is the proper way to throw a shaka? I said, well, it's like you're showing a badge at a bar where they're selling drugs, And then there's the short shaka, like the, hey, how's it, right? And then there's me and, hey, how's it? And then there's the, hey, how you better?
There's the, but what is this? That's so crazy, right? I mean, my Hawaiian uncle would always be saying, he would never go like this to anybody.
See, in Oahu, they used to say shaka. In Waimea, they would say easy.
Yeah,
Easy, brother.
Easy.
Easy.
Yeah.
No worries.
That's it.
Easy.
And I think the word shaka precedes the gesture, because the first instance I could find of the word shaka is from 1928.
What did it mean?
So the example is about a school dance, and they snuck a column into the newspaper titled, "Fellows, Don't Show This to the Teachers." And it was all written in Pigeon, and describing the band, it's "Some Shaka Band Boy." So it might mean something like awesome or, cool or something like that.
In the 20s.
So a lot of these words go really way back.
Uh-huh. The 20s and 30s was kind of a heyday for Pigeon
Yes,
here,
it
right?
was, yeah.
It was. It was such a common language,
60s
huh?
and 70s.
But it was at that time when it really, a lot of the development that occurred with all the features coming from all the different languages, it really matured at that point. And
All the school children
yes,
spoke it, that's
yes,
for sure,
definitely,
right?
Yeah. Well, not all, but because you still have those English standard schools, but definitely throughout the islands.
Has anyone said anything specific about the sort of socioeconomic relationship with Pigeon?
I mean, if you speak Pigeon, you poor.
No, well, in terms of, it's like palaka.
And don't make things no say if you Hawaiian, you poor.
No, but it's like palaka. It's like palaka, a visual identifier. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And it creates a commonality visually when we see that.
Oh.
It's also a kind of a class identifier. And I feel like Pigeon could be the same way.
Same way.
Yeah.
It's like
Kinda.
a tattoo.
I think a lot of it, the class distinction would be in the vocabulary. And or even the ethnic distinctions might be in the vocabulary. But what was consistent, even if you were born and raised in Hawaii, it didn't matter. Even if you went to Punahou, you got an accent that was unique to this place. I don't know how to say it. And the way you spoke a perfect English sentence, I would know whether or not you came from, or I would suspect you might have come from Hawaii, just because you never said the TH, you never said something, you said what.
And it's in the
like
vowels.
OT as opposed to what, I don't even know how to say it at the moment. I mean, the English way.
But again, there's the broken shards, right? Because Hawaiian had the diphthongs, right? Where
Right.
you say Waikiki. You don't say Waikiki. The A and the I are like blended, and almost the I becomes almost a ghost, where it's Waikiki or Kauai. You know, that kind of Maui, you know. And then in Pigeon, when that happens, the same thing. They disappear like that.
It's all sound. A lot of it is more important. In some respects, I think the sound is more important in identifying somebody who's a speaker from local Hawaii than always just the vocabulary. Because some of this vocabulary stuff that we call Pigeon, you know, got into the surfing culture. All the guys in California started saying the same stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But they were saying it kind of different.
Yeah.
You know, it's Andy.
But even when governor speaks, right? I mean, think about it. I mean, he's speaking perfectly English, but he still says important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You notice that it's not important; it's important.
Absolutely.
Which is a subtle thing, but you know, if you're trained for it, you go, whoa.
I won't vote for him.
You got me.
You know.
I kind of hear that in the way you talk too, Katie. You know, in a way, your English is a little bit inflected with.
I picked up a couple of things. I'm not originally from Hawaii, but I picked up a couple of things. And one that I noticed even, you know, among Punahou kids like you, is the vowel in o. So in a word like show, and maybe it's how someone from California might say it, but in Hawaii it'd be sho,
Yeah.
where it's not diphthongal, it's monophthong, so it's just o, and whereas in California o. So that's one difference. But then these kind of markers also change over time. So for like the vowel a, it seems to be undergoing a shift in both Pigeon and in English. That is here in Hawaii in a way that isn't happening in other dialects of English. So, for example, the word sand is increasingly more and more young people are saying it like sand, like really far back.
Almost an H.
Sand.
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 So there are differences like this that are starting to change in the speech of both Pigeon and English speakers.
You notice like local people will pronounce O-N-E and W-O-N differently. Wan and wan.
Yeah.
You know, oh, they're about wan. Oh, how many you like? Oh, wan. I don't know why. Well, you know, and there are dialectual things that we do too. You ever notice, like, you never hear local people say tuna fish.
Yeah.
They say tuna. You know what I mean? They never say, you people on the menu, would you like a tuna fish sandwich? No, I'll have a beef cow. It just seems odd.
Hey, any idea how the word grind got going?
Grind.
Yeah.
Yeah, grind.
like-
But like my dad, and I think you mentioned backstage, we used to say "I" for eat.
Yeah.
But I don't think they say that anymore.
No, they never did.
It
They
might-
don't.
It might come
And
back.
it's interesting, broken shards, I is eat, but it also means ground,
Yeah.
right? Because that's where the food comes from. So you go through, which also meant, you know, hey, how's it, baby? What? You like you like go to the ground.
How popular is cowpow?
What's
I get
that?
my blanket.
Oh, sorry.
Get chance, you think? How popular is cow these days?
How popular is cow?
How popular?
Nobody says it.
Really?
Cow.
I don't think they say cow, they grind, but
Grind.
it's in a lot of restaurant names.
Yeah.
Cow corner.
Still there.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, cow has an interesting history because it originally comes from Chinese Pigeon English. Chow, the chow, you know, chow chow. And then it became borrowed into Pigeon Hawaiian because cow sounds like a Hawaiian word. So people learned it thinking it was Hawaiian. And now here we have,
Tell the joke.
oh yeah. I kind of bungled it when I told you, but this was from the 1930s. And so a farmer was trying to feed a cow what was supposed to be given to a horse. And so the joke goes, cow no can cow cow, horse cow cow, cow cow cow, cow cow cow. And I've always loved that joke.
No, in the 30s, that was killing it.
Yeah.
That was the killer.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, that was the killer.
But you know what? With the proper I hear that joke and bro, you get a cow, horse, cow, only cow can cow. Stupid.
I know.
Right? It's the inflection.
Right, you got it.
And yet, we all know that sentiments, sensitive sentiments can be expressed in Pidgin as well.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
What was that? I'm sorry?
Sensitive sentiments can be expressed in Pidgin as well.
Yeah.
Pigeon can be used for.
Yeah, he went Maki.
Maki died dead.
Maki died dead.
Well, if you want to, you were talking about this earlier, where if you want to soften an idea, I don't know if you remember in the movie Goodfellas, where one of the guys were going, well, you were busting his chops a little bit. A little bit, a little bit. I'll bust it, a little bit, No, were you busting my chops? Yeah, you were busting my chops. A little bit, you know what I'm saying? A little bit, right? The equivalent in Hawaiian is, oh, yeah, well, what? He was bugging you. Yeah, small kind.
Yeah.
Right? Which is yes, but I want to soften it because we don't like beef.
Yeah, right. It's all, this is so much about our local culture. What are we saying about the way we are when we say, we try to minimize our, our big bodiness. We try to not be as specific when we're talking stink about somebody. We try to be a little bit more vague, maybe, because we don't want to mention the kind,
Well, think about the Pidgin English being recognized as a language, And in my act, I tell people, I said, Brasso, if you speak Pidgin, from now on, you're bilingual. Because you speak English and you speak Pidgin. And when you mention that you're bilingual, don't forget, include the lingual part. Because you like tell people, hey, bro, I was talking to Annie. He told me, yeah, I'm bi.
But,
in the 30s, that kills. But it's recognized as an actual language. Does that blow your mind?
That's what they've just said.
And that's important because throughout most of the 20th century, Pidgin didn't have that recognition. And in the schools, it was often thought, well, you have to get rid of Pidgin in order to learn standard English. And that was just such a difficult situation for kids who come to the schools. That's how their parents speak. It's all they ever heard. And now you have to give up that in order to learn standard English, which was a completely unnecessary burden to put on
and
kids.
they withdraw.
Yeah, when they could be bilingual.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Now you can come to UH and take classes about Pidgin. So Ken Sakota is in the audience. I'm going to embarrass him, but he's a Pidgin expert. He is who I go to when I have questions, and he teaches some fantastic classes on Pidgin. They're extremely popular, and then also, a lot of us who don't maybe teach strictly a whole class about Pidgin, we accept papers written in Pidgin. It's recognized in that official setting as well.
Wow.
Why are these people encroaching on the side?
Yes,
Well, because
we are.
it's
Slowly
time
but
for us
surely.
to open up the questions to the audience.
We are just about to jump into our question and answer session, but first a round of applause for our fabulous panelists tonight.
Gosh. You're all great.
My name is Vincent Yee. I work at a hotel. And when we work together with coworkers, everything is just Pidgin. It just flows naturally. And I think it's Pidgin is like the lingua franca of blue-collar Hawaii. White-collar Hawaii, not so much, because you're conducting business and things like that. Do you believe that's pretty much true?
Couldn't hear the question.
He says that among the people he works with, Pigeon is common, but he feels that in the white-collar world, perhaps not so much. Do you find
They
that?
just hide it better.
Yeah. I think though that what we are seeing, I don't know whether it's actually Pigeon, but we are seeing much more blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, trying to be proud of their blue-collar backgrounds. I mean, if you go to a place like Waiheʻe Club, right, where you got all these guys out there, I mean, they go out of their way to make sure that there's this local feel in the place. Like when you go eat lunch, you're not gonna have French fries and a hamburger. You're gonna have oxtail soup. And you're going to talk about the kind of things that you had. So I don't know. You're probably right in the sense that the blue-collar people may be using more of the vocabulary. But I think there is a sort of a kind of a renaissance going on of we all local now, or we want to be local,
It's a wannabe thing.
Well, it's more than that, though, because, you take like my friend Walter Dodge.
Yeah.
He was actually local at one time.
Yeah.
So
He's
now
coming
he
more local,
wants
he's
to
retired.
capture it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next question is on your left.
And I also think that among you and your workers, there's probably an unspoken need to differentiate yourself from the others. You know what I'm saying?
Actually, it's more of a dominant thing because we have people from the mainland. We have an Iranian guy. They try and speak Pidgin English to us.
Right, because he wants to be in.
Yeah, and they asked me, okay, which one speaks better English? I said, the Hawai'i guy is more authentic than the Iranian guy.
Can I make a comment about that too? So in the early 90s, there was a linguist at UH, late Charlie Sato. She published an article where she speculated about the future of Pigeon. And one point she brought up was Hawaii's tourist economy needing workers from Southeast Asia and other places to work in like the hotel industry. And so she speculated that the use of Pigeon would actually increase to some extent among this population because that's the kind of English they learn from other people. And so even though we have the situation of like Hawaii being part of, being the 50th state and with a lot of haoles coming from the mainland, that's not the only thing that's happening.
Next question is on your left.
Aloha, Joey Char, and I was wondering, how can we call it pigeon and not mina bird or parakeet or something else?
Good question.
That's yours.
That's you. You're on.
One of you got to answer that.
Okay, it actually comes from Chinese Pidgin English, and it's the Chinese pronunciation of the word business. It was business English. That's the kind of English that they used to conduct trade in the 1700s, 1800s.
I didn't know that.
Pretty cool.
It's Chinese?
Boy, you're really bilingual.
Oh, man, we bilingual like that. Wow.
Next question on the right.
Does that answer
But
your
I
question?
know one thing, the Chinese never know how to spell, because they don't spell it really like pigeon. I learned that the other night. It's spelled P-I something else. G-I-N.
It's Chinese, bro.
Next question.
Chinese.
Honaka school.
Next question.
Cool. Oh, here we go.
Hi, my name's Sandy Tsukiyama, and I'm a Portuguese speaker. And this question is basically for the researchers. that how much credit is the Portuguese language given to its input on why Pidgin is what it is? Because I have a whole list. I have a whole list, and we collaborated with Kent Sakoda and local Portuguese historian Herbert Carlos. We came up with a lot.
I would be very interested to hear that because I'm going to Portugal next month where I'm going to be talking about that topic. So I know Edgar Knowlton in the 1960s published an article about Portuguese and Pidgin and identified a number of features. And I regard Portuguese as probably the second most influential language on Pidgin besides Hawaiian. So,
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor, one of the big influences was one. They would say, like, una carta, like for one letter, there's una carta on the table, there's one letter on the table. Where in Pidgin, you get one letter on the table, right? So the one, in fact, and how I know this is I sold Pidgin English magnets so you could go on your refrigerator, right? And I forgot to put one. And you know how many letters? Yeah. How you gonna make one sentence if no more one? I'm gonna slap your head. And I think that was, is it Spanish or Pidgin? Or Portuguese that had the one.
It's also Hawaiian.
Yeah.
Hawaiian has one. Kekahim, something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even the Pidgin form of the Hawaiian language uses akahi in exactly the same way.
Exactly the same way?
Yeah.
But what's a better way to call your friend stupid than baboos?
Now, there's another good word that we cannot have around much longer.
A Portuguese word, baboos?
It's from the word baboso, which means drooling. So like the word for aloe vera, the word for the aloe vera plant, as we call it, aloe over here, when you break it off, it drools, right? Yeah. The name for that plant is baboso, babosa or baboso. And so a person, like a drooling idiot, like that.
The baboon.
And because the language of the Azores was influenced by Flemish settlers, it became different from baboso. So that's why they say garut instead of garoto, and they say bonut instead of bonoit, and for good evening or good night. And so the Azorean pronunciation came into what we know. So baboos is definitely a loan word.
Wow. That was a Portuguese answer.
Yeah.
I've got a question for Kent Sakoda, if no one else does. Kent, so glad you're here. What are some current issues in Pidgin, and what are students interested in your classes?
Wow, I wasn't expect this. I was going to hide out over here. I'm sorry, again, the question.
Yeah, what are contemporary issues in Pidgin?
Well, really contemporary ones are the fact that I think a lot of people are not aware of when they're using Pidgin anymore. So it's sort of like a mixture of English and Pidgin, and it's not really a problem, but I think that adds to the change, I think, in the language. It's something that we have to deal with, and Katie knows that we've had this conversation a lot before in terms of she does a lot of research in Hawaii English, so the English dialect is spoken here as opposed to the Pidgin that's spoken here. And so I ask her always, how do you know when one ends and the other begins? How can you tell the difference? And that's something that we're dealing with, I think, now. There's tremendous stuff. But can I make a comment about what Sandy said earlier about Portuguese? Ako mo Portuguese. So okay, so what in Portuguese, the Portuguese influence, we don't know so much because here's the reason. There's not as many loan words in Pidgin from Portuguese. Same thing with the Chinese. Okay, so the Portuguese were early on, right? Of course, the Hawaiians were here, but the Portuguese and the Chinese were early immigrant laborers here. And so you would expect a lot more loan words, but there's not a whole lot of it. Oh, sorry. Anyway, so yeah, so the long story short is that there's this thing called loan translations, calcs, that are not, so you borrow the concept from the other language, you borrow the concept from Portuguese, but you use the Pidgin word or the English word from Pidgin for that thing there. And so it sounds weird English, but in fact it comes from that language. So.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much.
And that's all the time we have tonight. But before we close, I want to thank the Daniel K. Inouye Institute for making tonight's program possible, and also Hawaii Public Radio for our media sponsor tonight. So a round of applause for them, please. Thank all of you for joining us. It's great to see a standing room only crowd here. We also have bento boxes for everyone here, along with beer and wine at the reception. So please join us for some food as well as drinks, and to continue the conversation. Finally, a round of applause for our panelists tonight. Thank you so much.